The morning sun beat down mercilessly on Natalie Garrison's raw knuckles as she scrubbed the wooden steps of the mercantile, her brush moving in practiced circles that had worn grooves into the bristles and calluses onto her palms. It was August 1883 in Seligman, Arizona Territory, and the dust seemed to rise from the earth itself, clinging to everything it touched, making her work feel endless and futile. She had been widowed for 8 months now, ever since consumption had taken Thomas from her bedside in their tiny rented room above the seamstress shop. At 23 years old, Natalie had learned that survival meant swallowing pride and accepting any honest work that came her way, even if it meant her knees ached from kneeling on hard wood, and her hands bled from the lye soap. The owner of the mercantile, Mr. Henderson, paid her 25 cents for scrubbing his steps and another 25 for sweeping the boardwalk in front of his store. It took her 2 hours of hard labor, and she did it 3 times a week. On other days, she took in mending, washed laundry for the boarding house, and sometimes helped Mrs. Chen in her kitchen when the restaurant got busy. Every coin went into the small cloth pouch she kept tied around her waist beneath her skirts, hidden from view and from temptation. She counted it each night by candlelight, watching the total creep upward with agonizing slowness. Rent was due every month, and food had to be purchased, and there were always unexpected expenses that threatened to drain her meager savings. Natalie dipped her brush into the bucket of soapy water, watching the suds foam up around the bristles before attacking another section of step. Her dark brown hair was pulled back in a simple bun, covered with a faded calico bonnet that had once been a cheerful yellow, but had long since faded to the color of old butter. Her dress was patched at the elbows and hem, but it was clean and pressed because she would not let poverty rob her of dignity. Thomas had loved her spirit, he always said. He had loved the way she held her head high even when they had nothing but beans and cornbread for dinner. She tried to remember his voice now, but it was getting harder with each passing month, and that frightened her more than she cared to admit. "Morning, Mrs. Garrison," a voice called from above, and Natalie looked up to see Samuel Quinn standing at the top of the steps, his tall frame casting a shadow that offered momentary relief from the sun. She sat back on her heels, using the back of her wrist to push a strand of hair from her face. "Mr. Quinn." "Good morning." Samuel Quinn was a rancher who owned a spread about 15 miles north of town, a place called the Triple Q Ranch that ran cattle and horses across thousands of acres of Arizona grassland. He was 30 years old, weathered by sun and wind, with dark hair that was always a bit too long and eyes the color of aged whiskey. He came into town once a week for supplies, and Natalie had seen him often enough to nod a greeting, but they had never exchanged more than pleasantries. "Hot day for such work," he observed, his voice carrying a hint of Texas in the vowels. He held his hat in his hands, turning it slowly by the brim. "Every day is hot for work in August," Natalie replied, offering a small smile before turning back to her scrubbing. She did not mean to be curt, but she had learned that lingering conversations with men, even respectable ones, could lead to assumptions she could not afford. "I suppose that is true," Samuel said, but he did not move on as she expected. Instead, he stood there in silence for a moment, watching her work with an expression she could not quite read. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Mrs. Garrison, might I have a word with you when you have finished here?" Natalie paused mid-scrub, her heart giving an uncomfortable lurch. Men who wanted words usually wanted something else as well, and she had turned down more than one improper proposal since Thomas died. Widows were considered fair game by certain types of men who assumed desperation, made a woman amenable to arrangements that would shame her. "I assure you," It is a business matter, Samuel added quickly, as though reading her hesitation. Nothing untoward. I have a proposition that might benefit us both, and I would rather discuss it over a proper conversation than here in the street. The word proposition made her wary, but there was something in his steady gaze that seemed honest. Against her better judgment, she nodded. I will be finished in 20 minutes. I suppose we could speak at the restaurant if you are buying coffee. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. I can manage that. He tipped his hat and walked on down the street toward the feed store, leaving Natalie alone with her thoughts and her scrub brush. She worked faster now, her mind racing with possibilities. What could a rancher want with a widow who had nothing to offer but her labor? She tried not to let hope creep in, but it came anyway, stubborn and unwelcome. Hope was dangerous when you had so little to lose. 20 minutes later, her hands washed and her apron removed, Natalie walked into the restaurant where Mrs. Chen greeted her with a knowing look. The older woman had been kind to Natalie, offering her meals at reduced prices and never asking questions about her circumstances. Samuel Quinn sat at a corner table, 2 cups of coffee, already steaming on the worn wood surface. He stood when she approached, waiting until she had settled into the chair across from him before sitting down again. The manners of a man raised properly, she noted. Thank you for agreeing to speak with me, he began, wrapping his hands around his coffee cup. I will be direct because I suspect you do not have time for elaborate preambles. I appreciate directness, Natalie said, taking a sip of the coffee and savoring the rich flavor. She allowed herself coffee only rarely, as it was an expense she could not justify. I need a housekeeper, Samuel said without further preamble. My ranch is a working operation with 4 hired hands who live in the bunkhouse. They take care of the cattle and horses, but the main house has been neglected since my mother passed 2 years ago. I have been managing with my own poor cooking and letting the dust pile up where it will, but it is no way to live. I need someone who can keep house, cook meals, and manage the domestic side of the ranch while I focus on the cattle operation. Natalie set down her cup carefully. I see. And you thought of me. I have seen you around town, he said, meeting her eyes directly. You work harder than most men I know, and you do not complain. Mrs. Chen speaks highly of you, as does Mrs. Henderson at the mercantile. I asked around before approaching you because I wanted to know your character. You investigated me. There was no heat in her words, only curiosity. I did my due diligence, he corrected gently. The ranch is isolated, Mrs. Garrison. I needed to know that the person I hired would be trustworthy and capable. Everything I learned suggests you are both. Natalie folded her hands in her lap, trying to process what he was offering. A position as housekeeper on a ranch would mean steady work, steady pay, and likely room and board. It would mean leaving behind the endless scramble for coins, the worry about rent, the bone-deep exhaustion of piecing together survival from a dozen different small jobs. What would the wage be? She asked, forcing herself to think practically rather than emotionally. $20 a month, plus room and board, Samuel said. You would have your own room in the main house, separate from the bunkhouse where the hands sleep. 3 meals a day and whatever supplies you need for keeping the house. Sundays off if you want to come into town for church or visiting. $20 a month. Natalie did the calculation in her head. She was currently making perhaps $8 a month if she was lucky, and that was before paying for food and rent. This was more than double, with no expenses for her keep. That is generous, she said carefully, waiting for the catch. There was always a catch. Samuel leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. I need good help and I am willing to pay for it, but I will be honest with you, Mrs. Garrison. There is another reason I am offering you this position specifically. Here it comes, Natalie thought, her spine stiffening. People talk, Samuel continued, and I am aware that your situation in town is precarious. A young widow alone, with no family and no protection, is vulnerable to gossip and worse. I also know that some men in this town have approached you with proposals that insult your dignity. Natalie felt heat rise in her cheeks. She had not realized her struggles were so public. What I am offering, Samuel said firmly, is honest work with no expectations beyond the work itself. You would be my employee, nothing more. The hands know better than to bother the household staff, and I would make certain you were treated with respect. If at any point you felt unsafe or uncomfortable, you would be free to leave with 2 weeks' wages as severance. It was almost too good to be true, which made Natalie suspicious by default. Why would you do this for me? You do not know me. No, I do not, Samuel agreed. But I know what it is like to struggle, and I know what it is like to need a chance when the world seems determined to keep you down. My father lost our ranch in Texas when I was 18. We came out here with nothing and rebuilt from scratch. He taught me that you measure a person by how they handle hardship, not by how they handle plenty. From what I have seen, Mrs. Garrison, you handle hardship with dignity and determination. Those are qualities I value. Natalie studied his face, searching for signs of deception or hidden motive. She found none, only a straightforward honesty that seemed almost foreign after months of dealing with men who looked at her like she was something to be acquired rather than someone to be respected. When would you need me to start? She heard herself ask. As soon as you are able to settle your affairs in town, Samuel said. I can provide a wagon to move whatever belongings you wish to bring. I do not have many belongings, Natalie admitted. Everything I own fits in 2 trunks. Then we can manage that easily enough. He finished his coffee and set down the cup. Take a day to think about it if you need to. I understand this is a significant decision. But Natalie had already made her decision. Opportunities like this did not come along twice, and she was not foolish enough to turn down Providence when it knocked. I do not need a day. I accept your offer, Mr. Quinn. Relief crossed his features, so quick she almost missed it. I am glad to hear it. Can you be ready by the day after tomorrow? That will give you time to give notice on your room and finish any commitments you have made. I can be ready, Natalie confirmed. They shook hands over the table, his grip firm but not crushing, and for the first time in months, Natalie felt something like hope unfurl in her chest. It was fragile and cautious, but it was real. The next day and a half passed in a blur of activity. Natalie gave notice to her landlady, who seemed more relieved than sorry to lose a tenant who paid, but added no value to her establishment. She collected the few dresses she owned, her sewing kit, her Bible, a daguerreotype of Thomas that was her most precious possession, and the small collection of books she had managed to keep despite selling nearly everything else. It all fit into 2 battered trunks just as she had said, with room to spare. Mrs. Chen gave her a bag of tea as a parting gift. You be careful out there, the older woman said, gripping Natalie's hands in hers. A ranch is lonely, and loneliness can make people do foolish things. I will be careful, Natalie promised, understanding the warning for what it was. Mrs. Chen had been young once and alone, and she knew the dangers that came with isolation. Samuel arrived promptly at 8 in the morning, driving a wagon pulled by 2 sturdy horses. He loaded her trunks into the back with ease, then helped her up onto the bench seat. The ride to the ranch took 3 hours, following a dusty road that wound through scrub brush and desert landscape before gradually giving way to grassland. The Triple Q Ranch appeared on the horizon like a promise, a collection of buildings that spoke of prosperity and permanence. The main house was built of adobe and wood. 2 stories tall with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. It was larger than Natalie had expected, with glass windows that gleamed in the sunlight and a roof that looked recently repaired. To the left stood a barn, a stable, and several smaller outbuildings. The bunkhouse sat to the right, far enough from the main house to offer privacy to both parties. "It is beautiful," Natalie said honestly, taking in the sight of land that stretched as far as she could see, dotted with cattle and horses. "It will do," Samuel said with obvious pride despite his modest words. He helped her down from the wagon and carried her trunks inside, showing her to a bedroom on the ground floor that had clearly been prepared for her arrival. The room was simple but clean, with a real bed, a wardrobe, a washstand, and even a small writing desk near the window. "This is more than I expected," Natalie said, running her hand over the smooth wood of the desk. "My mother used this room as her sewing room," Samuel explained, standing in the doorway. "I thought it would suit your needs. The kitchen is through here, and I will show you where everything is stored. The hands eat breakfast at 5:30, dinner at noon, and supper at 6. You will ring the bell on the porch to call them in." Over the next several hours, Samuel walked her through the house, showing her the pantry stocked with supplies, the root cellar filled with vegetables and preserved goods, the laundry area with its copper tub and washboards, and the dining room where meals were served. The house was indeed dusty and in need of a woman's touch, but it had good bones and was well constructed. "I will leave you to settle in," Samuel said finally, standing in the kitchen as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows. "If you need anything, I will be working in the barn until supper time. The hands will want to meet you then." "Mr. Quinn," Natalie said, stopping him before he could leave. "Thank you. For this opportunity, I will not disappoint you." He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "I do not think you could, Mrs. Garrison." After he left, Natalie stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the silence of a house that was waiting to be filled with life again. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. By the time 5:30 arrived the next morning, Natalie had been up for 2 hours. She had laid the table in the dining room with plates and cutlery, made 2 pots of coffee strong enough to wake the dead, fried 3 dozen eggs, made a mountain of biscuits, and cooked enough bacon and sausage to feed an army. She was not sure how much 4 ranch hands would eat, so she had erred on the side of abundance. When she rang the bell, they came filing in from the bunkhouse, caps in hands and curiosity in their eyes. They were younger than she expected, ranging from late teens to early 30s, all sun-darkened and lean from hard physical labor. Samuel made the introductions. "Boys, this is Mrs. Garrison, our new housekeeper. Mrs. Garrison, this is Pete, Miguel, James, and Henry." They nodded politely, murmuring their greetings, and took their seats at the long table. Natalie served the food family style, setting platters and bowls in the center so they could help themselves, and the initial awkwardness dissolved as the men focused on eating. They were clearly hungry, and they ate with the focused intensity of people who worked hard and needed fuel. "Madam, these are the best biscuits I have had since leaving home," Henry said, reaching for his third. He looked to be about 20, with red hair and freckles that made him look even younger. "Thank you, Henry," Natalie said, pleased. "I am glad you are enjoying them." The meal passed with easy conversation among the men, talk of fence repairs and cattle movements and a horse that needed shoes. Natalie listened while she ate her own breakfast at the far end of the table, learning the rhythm of ranch life through their words. Over the following weeks, Natalie settled into the routine of the Triple Q Ranch. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, spent her mornings cleaning and organizing the house that had been neglected for too long, prepared the midday meal, used her afternoons for laundry and mending and preserving food, and then made supper before washing up and collapsing into bed. It was hard work, but it was steady work, and she had the satisfaction of seeing immediate results from her efforts. The house transformed under her care. She scrubbed floors until they gleamed, washed windows until they sparkled, beat rugs until the dust stopped rising, and organized cupboards with the efficiency of a general marshaling troops. She discovered that she enjoyed cooking for people who appreciated it, who cleaned their plates and asked for seconds and thanked her sincerely. The hands were respectful, treating her with the deference they would show their own mothers, and Samuel was an easy employer who never complained and always expressed gratitude. But it was Samuel himself who surprised her most. He was not the distant boss she had expected. He ate his meals with the hands, working alongside them during the day and only retreating to his office in the evenings to manage the books and correspondence. He was fair and firm, commanding respect without demanding it, and the ranch ran smoothly under his leadership. Natalie found herself noticing small things about him. The way he always washed up before coming to the table, no matter how dirty the work had been. The way he listened when people spoke, giving them his full attention rather than dismissing them. The way he was unfailingly polite to her, treating her as a valued employee rather than a servant. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, which was not often but all the more impactful for its rarity. She tried not to notice these things. She tried to keep her focus on her work and nothing else. She was still in mourning for Thomas, and it felt disloyal to even think about another man. But grief was a strange thing she was learning. It did not follow rules or timelines, and it could coexist with other emotions in ways that felt both wrong and natural at the same time. One evening in late September, about 6 weeks after Natalie had arrived at the ranch, Samuel found her on the porch after supper. She had taken to sitting there in the evenings when the work was done, enjoying the cool air and the vast sky that seemed to go on forever. The sunset was painting the clouds in shades of orange and pink, and the first stars were beginning to appear. "You mind if I join you?" Samuel asked, holding 2 cups of coffee. "It is your porch," Natalie said, then softened her words with a smile. "I mean, of course not." He handed her one of the cups and sat in the chair next to hers, stretching out his long legs with a sigh of weariness. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the sky change colors. "The house looks better than it has in years," Samuel said eventually. "My mother would be pleased to see it so well cared for." "She must have loved it here," Natalie said, thinking of the touches of femininity she had found throughout the house. The curtains carefully sewn, the gardens that had once been tended but now ran wild. "She did," Samuel confirmed. "My father built this place for her, wanted to give her something lasting after we lost everything in Texas. She only got to enjoy it for 3 years before a fever took her. My father followed 6 months later. I think he died of a broken heart as much as anything else." "I am sorry," Natalie said softly. "That must have been difficult." "It was," Samuel agreed. "I was 28 years old and suddenly responsible for everything. The ranch, the hands, all of it. There were days I was not sure I would make it through. But you did." "I did," he said, turning to look at her. "Same as you are making it through. Loss is a hard teacher, but it makes us stronger whether we want to be or not." Natalie felt tears prick her eyes unexpectedly. No one had acknowledged her struggle so directly, so kindly, since Thomas died. Everyone else had either pitied her or judged her or ignored her entirely. But Samuel saw her, really saw her, and there was a strange comfort in that. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For understanding. For giving me this chance." for treating me like a person rather than a burden or a charity case. Samuel was quiet for a moment, his gaze returning to the horizon. You are neither of those things, Natalie. You are a woman of remarkable strength and character, and this ranch is better for having you here. It was the first time he had used her given name, and hearing it in his voice sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. She did not correct him, did not insist on the formality of Mrs. Garrison. Instead, she simply said, "You can call me Natalie if you would like." I think we have moved past strict formality. He smiled, a real smile that transformed his usually serious face. Then you should call me Samuel, or Sam, which is what my friends call me. Samuel suits you better, Natalie decided. It is a strong name. Then Samuel it is. They sat together until full dark, talking about inconsequential things and important things in equal measure. Natalie learned that Samuel loved the land with a passion that bordered on spiritual, that he read books on ranching techniques and animal husbandry, that he dreamed of building the Triple Q into something that would last generations. Samuel learned that Natalie had wanted to be a teacher before her father's debts had forced her into an early marriage, that she loved reading anything she could get her hands on, that she missed the ocean even though she had only seen it twice in her life. When they finally parted for the night, Natalie lay in her bed and stared at the ceiling, her heart beating faster than it should. She was in dangerous territory, she knew. Employers and employees should not become friends, and they certainly should not become anything more. But she could not deny the connection she felt, the ease of conversation, the comfort of his presence. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself she was lonely and grateful and confusing those feelings for something else. She told herself she would be more careful, more distant, more appropriate. She told herself many things, but in her heart, she knew the truth was already writing itself in ways she could not control. The autumn passed in a rhythm of work and growing familiarity. Natalie continued to run the household with capable efficiency, and Samuel continued to run the ranch with steady competence. But their evening conversations on the porch became a ritual, a time when the day's work was done and they could simply be two people sharing space and stories. The hands noticed, of course. Natalie caught knowing looks exchanged between Pete and Miguel, saw the way Henry grinned when Samuel lingered over his coffee at breakfast, heard James whistle tunelessly when Samuel asked Natalie to join him for a ride to check on the north pasture fence. "They think something is happening between us," Natalie said to Samuel one evening in October as they sat on the porch watching storm clouds gather on the horizon. "Is that a problem?" Samuel asked, his tone carefully neutral. "It depends on whether there is something to think," Natalie replied, her heart hammering in her chest. They had been dancing around this unspoken thing for weeks now, and she was tired of pretending she did not feel it. Samuel turned to look at her fully, his whiskey-colored eyes intense in the fading light. "Do you want there to be?" It was a moment of terrifying honesty. Natalie could deflect, could laugh it off, could retreat behind the safety of propriety and social expectations. Or she could tell the truth and risk everything. "Yes," she whispered. "God help me, yes." Samuel stood and crossed to her chair, kneeling beside it so they were eye to eye. "I have been drawn to you since the day I saw you scrubbing those steps in town. You were so fierce, so determined, refusing to let circumstances break you. I asked around about you before I offered you this job, yes, but not just to check your character. I wanted to know if there was someone else, if you were spoken for, if I even had a chance." "A chance at what?" Natalie asked, her voice shaking. "At courting you properly," Samuel said. "At offering you more than just employment, at asking you to consider a future that includes more than being my housekeeper." Natalie felt tears spill over and run down her cheeks. "I was married before, you know that." I do. And I loved him. I loved Thomas. I know that too, Samuel said gently, reaching up to wipe away her tears with his thumb. I am not asking you to forget him or to pretend he never existed. I am only asking if there might be room in your heart for something new, something different. Something with me. I feel guilty, Natalie admitted. He has been gone less than a year, and already I am thinking about another man. What does that say about me? It says you are alive, Samuel replied. It says your heart still works, still hopes, still has capacity for joy. Thomas would want that for you, would he not? If he loved you the way you loved him, he would want you to live fully, not to spend the rest of your life alone out of misplaced loyalty to his memory. Natalie knew he was right. Thomas had been a kind man, a good man, and he would have hated the thought of her suffering unnecessarily. But knowing it intellectually and feeling it emotionally were two different things. I am afraid, she confessed. Afraid of moving too fast, afraid of making a mistake, afraid of being hurt again. Those are reasonable fears, Samuel acknowledged. And I will not rush you or push you into anything you are not ready for, but I wanted you to know how I feel, Natalie. I wanted you to know that when I look at you, I see not just my housekeeper, but a woman I admire and respect and care for deeply. A woman I could love, if you would let me. The storm broke then, rain suddenly sheeting down from the sky, but neither of them moved. They stayed there on the porch, sheltered by the roof, locked in a moment that would change everything. I want to try, Natalie said finally. I want to see where this goes, even though it scares me. Samuel smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. That is all I am asking. We will take it slow. We will do this right. And if at any point you want to stop, you just say the word and we go back to being employer and employee with no hard feelings. I do not think we could ever go back to that, Natalie said with a shaky laugh, but I appreciate the sentiment. Samuel stood and held out his hand. Would you like to come inside out of the rain? I can make us some tea and we can talk about what comes next. Natalie placed her hand in his, feeling the calluses from years of ranch work, the strength in his fingers as they closed gently around hers. Yes. I would like that very much. The courtship that followed was nothing like Natalie's first experience of romance. When she had married Thomas, she had been 19 and desperate to escape her father's debts and his increasingly erratic behavior. Thomas had been kind and willing to take her with no dowry, and she had grown to love him over time. It had been a practical arrangement that became affectionate. This was different. This was a choice made with open eyes and a full heart. Samuel courted her the way she had always imagined being courted, with attention and intention and romance. He brought her wildflowers picked from the prairie. He taught her to ride horses properly, not just sitting side saddle in town, but really riding with confidence and skill. He took her to the North Ridge where the view stretched for miles and showed her every corner of his ranch, sharing his dreams for its future. He read to her in the evenings from books on history and science and poetry, his voice low and soothing in the lamplight. He also gave her space. On Sundays, he drove her into town for church if she wanted to go, and gave her time to visit with Mrs. Chen or shop for personal items or simply have time away from the ranch. He never pressured her for more than she was ready to give, never pushed for intimacy beyond holding hands or a chaste kiss on the forehead when he said good night. You are very patient, Natalie observed one evening in late November as they sat by the fire in the parlor, his arm around her shoulders as she leaned against him. I have waited this long to find someone worth waiting for, Samuel replied. I can wait a little longer to do things properly. What does properly mean to you? Natalie asked, curious. Samuel was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing absent patterns on her sleeve. It means courting you with respect and intention. It means not taking advantage of the fact that you live in my house and work for me. It means giving you time to be sure of your feelings without the pressure of physical intimacy clouding your judgment. And when the time is right, it means asking you to marry me in front of God and everyone, making you my wife in truth, not just in feeling. Natalie's heart stuttered at the word marriage. You want to marry me? Eventually, yes, Samuel said. If that is what you want to. I am not proposing tonight, Natalie. I know it is too soon and you need more time, but I want you to know my intentions are honorable and permanent. When I commit to something, I commit fully, and I want to commit to you for the rest of my life, if you will have me. Tears pricked at Natalie's eyes again. She seemed to cry more easily these days, but they were good tears, tears of emotion and relief and joy rather than sorrow and frustration. I think I might want that too, she admitted. I think I might be falling in love with you, Samuel Quinn, and it terrifies me and exhilarates me in equal measure. He kissed her then, really kissed her, his lips warm and gentle against hers. It was nothing like the perfunctory kisses she had shared with Thomas, nothing like the few awkward kisses she had experienced before marriage. This was heat and promise and connection, a meeting of not just lips but souls. When they pulled apart, both breathing heavily, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. I am definitely falling in love with you, Natalie Garrison. No might about it. The winter came, bringing cold winds and occasional snow to the high desert. The ranch work slowed but did not stop, and Natalie learned the rhythm of the changing seasons. She preserved food for the lean months, made sure the house stayed warm and comfortable, and continued to feed the men who worked the land alongside Samuel. Christmas arrived, and Natalie decorated the house with evergreen boughs and candles, creating a festive atmosphere that the ranch had not seen in years. She baked cookies and bread and made a feast for Christmas dinner that had everyone groaning with satisfaction. Samuel gave her a gift, a beautiful shawl in deep blue wool that he had ordered from a catalog, and she gave him a shirt she had sewn herself, perfectly fitted to his frame. On New Year's Eve, as 1883 became 1884, Samuel took Natalie's hand as they stood on the porch watching the stars. A new year, he said softly. A new beginning. It has already been a year of new beginnings, Natalie replied, thinking of how much had changed since that hot August day when she had been scrubbing steps for coins. I want to ask you something, Samuel said, turning to face her. But I need you to answer honestly, not just give me the answer you think I want to hear. All right, Natalie agreed, her pulse quickening. Are you happy here? Truly happy, not just grateful for employment or security, but genuinely content with your life on this ranch? Natalie considered the question seriously, looking inward at her own heart. Yes, she said finally. I am happier than I have been in years, perhaps happier than I have ever been. I love the work, I love the land, I love the people here. And I love you, Samuel. I am ready to say that now without qualification or fear. I love you. Samuel's face broke into a grin of pure joy. Then I have another question to ask you. He dropped to one knee right there on the porch, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple gold band with a single small diamond, nothing ostentatious but clearly chosen with care. Natalie Garrison, I know we have only been courting for a few months, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You are my perfect match in every way that matters. You are strong and kind and capable and beautiful, and I want to spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you have made me. Will you marry me? Will you take my name and become Natalie Quinn, not just my housekeeper or my employee, but my wife and my partner in all things? Natalie felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling through them. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. Samuel stood and slipped the ring onto her finger, then swept her into his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her deeply, and she kissed him back with all the love and hope and joy that filled her heart to overflowing. From the bunkhouse came a cheer, and they looked over to see all four hands standing in the doorway, grinning and clapping. "About time, boss," Pete called out. "We were starting to think you would never get around to it." "Henry owes me $5, Miguel added. "I said he would propose before Valentine's Day, and Henry said it would take until spring." Everyone laughed, and the hands came over to offer their congratulations, shaking Samuel's hand and giving Natalie awkward but heartfelt hugs. "So does this mean she is going to be the boss's wife now?" James asked. "Do we still call her Mrs. Garrison? Soon enough, you will call her Mrs. Quinn," Samuel said proudly, his arm around Natalie's waist. "And yes, she will be my wife, but she will still be the one making sure you all get fed, so I suggest you treat her with even more respect than before." "We will treat her like the queen she is," Henry declared gallantly, which earned him good-natured ribbing from the others. They all went inside then, and Natalie made hot chocolate for everyone while they talked about wedding plans and the future. It was decided that they would marry in February, giving them time to make arrangements but not waiting so long that it felt interminable. "Will you want a big wedding?" Samuel asked later that night after everyone had gone to their respective beds, and they sat alone in the parlor. "No," Natalie said without hesitation. "Just something small and simple, maybe at the church in town with a few friends present. I do not need elaborate to be happy, Samuel, I just need you. You have me," he promised, "now and always." The wedding took place on the 14th of February, 1884, Valentine's Day. The weather cooperated beautifully, giving them a clear, cold day with brilliant sunshine. Natalie wore a simple dress in ivory satin that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew, with the blue shawl Samuel had given her for Christmas draped over her shoulders. Samuel wore his best suit and a new tie, and looked so handsome that Natalie's breath caught when she saw him waiting at the altar. Mrs. Chen was there, beaming with pride as though Natalie were her own daughter. The ranch hands attended, scrubbed clean and wearing their Sunday best. The minister from the church, Reverend Thomas, performed the ceremony with warmth and sincerity. A handful of other townspeople came as well, people who had been kind to Natalie during her widowhood and who were genuinely happy to see her finding love again. When the minister pronounced them man and wife, Samuel kissed his bride with gentle reverence, and the small congregation applauded. Natalie was now Natalie Quinn, and her heart felt so full she thought it might burst. They held a small reception at the restaurant, with food that Mrs. Chen had prepared as her wedding gift to them. There was laughter and toasting and good wishes all around. As the afternoon faded into evening, Samuel and Natalie said their goodbyes and climbed into the wagon for the ride back to the ranch. "Mrs. Quinn," Samuel said, trying out the name. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," Natalie agreed, snuggling close to him on the wagon seat. "So do I, Mr. Quinn." That night, their wedding night, was a revelation. Samuel was patient and tender, taking his time to show Natalie what love could be like between two people who truly cared for each other. It was nothing like the dutiful coupling she had experienced in her first marriage, nothing like the quick and somewhat awkward encounters with Thomas, who had been a good man but not a passionate one. This was fire and tenderness combined, intensity tempered with gentleness. Samuel worshipped her body with his hands and mouth, learning what made her gasp and sigh, teaching her pleasures she had never known existed. And when they finally came together, it felt like a completion, like two halves becoming whole. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the big bed that was now theirs to share, and Natalie traced her fingers over Samuel's chest, feeling his heart beat strong and steady beneath her palm. "I never knew it could be like this," she admitted softly. "Like what?" Samuel asked, running his fingers through her unbound hair, which fell in dark waves to her waist. "So much, so overwhelming, so right." She looked up at him, seeing the love in his eyes. "Thank you for waiting, for being patient, for doing everything the proper way." "You were worth every moment of waiting," Samuel assured her. "And this is just the beginning, Natalie. We have our whole lives ahead of us." As the months passed, Natalie settled into her new role as wife and partner. She was no longer just the housekeeper, though she still managed the household. She was Samuel's confidante in business matters, his companion in daily life, his lover in the privacy of their bedroom. She learned the intricacies of running a ranch, understanding the financial side and the practical side in ways she never had before. Samuel valued her opinion and often asked for her thoughts on major decisions. When he was considering buying additional land to expand the ranch, he showed her the figures and talked through the pros and cons with her. When he was thinking about hiring another hand, he asked her to interview the candidates and give him her assessment of their character. He treated her as an equal partner, not as a subordinate, and Natalie blossomed under that respect. By summer, Natalie discovered she was pregnant. She was both thrilled and terrified, remembering the women who had died in childbirth, aware of all the things that could go wrong. But Samuel was overjoyed, already planning for the nursery and talking about teaching his son or daughter to ride as soon as they could walk. "What if something goes wrong?" Natalie asked one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Then we will face it together," Samuel said firmly. "But nothing is going to go wrong, Natalie. You are strong and healthy, and we will get you the best care available." "I am not going to lose you." "You cannot promise that," she whispered. "No, I cannot," he admitted. "But I can promise that I will do everything in my power to keep you safe, and that no matter what happens, you are loved beyond measure." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and as Natalie's belly grew, so did Samuel's protectiveness. He insisted she rest more, do less physical labor, take naps in the afternoon. She protested but secretly enjoyed being cared for so attentively. The hands were thrilled about the baby, already placing bets on whether it would be a boy or girl and arguing about who would get to teach the child various skills. "I am going to teach the baby to rope," Pete declared. "Not until I teach the baby to ride," Miguel countered. "You are all assuming the baby will want to be a rancher," James pointed out. "Maybe the baby will want to be a teacher or a doctor or something else entirely." "Whatever the baby wants to be, we will support," Samuel said firmly. "But I certainly hope at least one of my children will want to take over the ranch someday." "One of your children," Henry repeated, grinning. "You planning on having a whole houseful, boss?" "As many as God sees fit to give us," Samuel replied, pulling Natalie close. "As many as we can love and raise well." In March of 1885, Natalie went into labor. The birth was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours, and there were moments when even the doctor looked worried. Samuel stayed with her the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, encouraging her even when she cursed him and swore she would never do this again. But when their son finally entered the world, red-faced and wailing lustily, all the pain was forgotten in the rush of overwhelming love. He was perfect, with a full head of dark hair and his father's nose and his mother's chin. "What should we name him?" Natalie asked, exhausted but elated as she held their son for the first time. Samuel traced a gentle finger down the baby's cheek, his eyes wet with tears. "Thomas. After your first husband, if that is all right with you. He was part of your life, and I do not want you to ever feel like you have to erase that history." Natalie felt her heart swell with love for this man who was so secure in himself that he could honor the memory of the man who had come before him. "Thomas Samuel Quinn," she said. "So he carries both of you." "Perfect," Samuel agreed, kissing first his son's forehead and then his wife's. "Absolutely perfect." Life on the Triple Q Ranch settled into a new rhythm, one that included a baby's cries and laughter, late-night feedings and diaper changes, first smiles and first words. Thomas was a healthy, happy baby who was doted on by everyone from his parents to the ranch hands to Mrs. Chen, who came to visit regularly bearing gifts of toys and clothing. When Thomas was 18 months old, Natalie became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect, and the birth, while still difficult, was shorter. Their second child was a daughter, born in December of 1886, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's smile. They named her Sarah Margaret Quinn, after Samuel's mother Sarah and Natalie's mother Margaret, neither of whom had lived to meet their grandchildren but both of whom deserved to be remembered. "2 children before our 3rd anniversary," Samuel marveled one night as they watched their baby sleep, Thomas in his little bed and Sarah in her cradle. "We are building quite a family, Mrs. Quinn." "Is that a complaint?" Natalie asked, amused. "Not even slightly," Samuel assured her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "I love our life, Natalie. I love you and our children and the home we have built together. I would not change a single thing. Not even the sleepless nights," she teased. "Not even those," he confirmed. "Every moment with you is a gift, even the exhausting ones." As the years passed, the Quinn family continued to grow. A 3rd child arrived in 1888, another boy they named William. A 4th in 1890, another daughter named Elizabeth. Each birth was celebrated, each child was loved, and the ranch prospered under Samuel's leadership and Natalie's steady presence. The children grew up wild and free, learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping with chores as soon as they were old enough, running across the prairie with the ranch dogs at their heels. They were educated at home by Natalie, who finally got to be the teacher she had always wanted to be, and they were taught practical skills by Samuel and the hands. Pete eventually married and brought his wife to live in a small house Samuel built on the ranch property. Miguel met a woman in town and courted her properly before making her his bride as well. James decided ranching was not for him and went east to seek his fortune in business. Henry stayed on, becoming Samuel's foreman and right-hand man, as loyal as a brother. The original 4 hands were eventually joined by others as the ranch expanded, but those first 4 always held a special place in the Quinn family's heart. They had been there from the beginning, had watched Samuel and Natalie fall in love, had celebrated their wedding and welcomed their children. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Samuel took Natalie back to Seligman and showed her the steps where he had first seen her scrubbing for coins. "You remember what I was thinking that day?" he asked as they stood on the wooden boardwalk, the town bustling around them. "What were you thinking?" Natalie asked, lacing her fingers through his. "I was thinking that I had never seen anyone more beautiful," Samuel said. "Not because of how you looked, though you have always been lovely, but because of the dignity you maintained even in such humble circumstances. You were not defeated, Natalie. You were determined, and I knew in that moment that I wanted to know you, wanted to help you if I could, wanted to be part of your story." "You became my whole story," Natalie said softly. "You gave me your name, your home, your love. You gave me a life I never dreamed possible when I was kneeling on these steps thinking about how I would pay rent. You saved me, Samuel." "No," he corrected gently. "You saved yourself. You had the strength to survive, to keep going, to accept help when it was offered." I just had the privilege of being the one who got to offer it. We saved each other, Natalie. I was drowning in loneliness and work and duty, and you brought joy and love and life back to my world." They kissed there on the steps, not caring who saw, not caring what anyone thought. They were Samuel and Natalie Quinn, and they had built something beautiful together out of loss and hope and love. Years continued to pass in the way they do, bringing changes and challenges and joys. The children grew into teenagers and then young adults, each finding their own path in life. Thomas became a rancher like his father, taking over more and more of the triple QTKS operations as Samuel grew older. Sarah married a lawyer and moved to Phoenix, where she championed education reform and women's rights. William became a veterinarian, staying close to home and caring for the animals of the territory. Elizabeth, the youngest, became a teacher like her mother had always wanted to be, opening a school in Seligman that served children from all the surrounding ranches and farms. Samuel and Natalie grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. Their hair turned gray, then white. Their bodies slowed, becoming less agile but no less determined. They held grandchildren, and then great-grandchildren, watching their family tree branch and flourish in ways they could never have imagined in those early days. On the evening of their 40th wedding anniversary in 1924, they sat together on the same porch where Samuel had proposed all those years ago. Their children and grandchildren had thrown them a party earlier in the day, filling the ranch with noise and laughter and love. Now, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, they were alone again, just the two of them as it had been in the beginning. 40 years, Natalie marveled, her hand clasped in Samuel's, both their fingers knotted with age but their grip still strong. How is that possible? It feels like yesterday and forever ago at the same time. It has been the best 40 years of my life, Samuel said. His voice was rougher now, weathered by time and use but still warm with love. Every single day with you has been a blessing, Natalie Quinn, even the hard days. She asked, thinking of the children they had buried, the financial scares, the droughts and harsh winters, all the challenges that life inevitably brought. Especially the hard days, Samuel confirmed. Because those were the days that proved what we were made of, that showed us how strong our foundation was. We weathered every storm together, and we came out stronger each time. Natalie leaned her head on his shoulder, just as she had done so many times over the decades. I love you, Samuel Quinn. I have loved you since those first evenings when we talked on this porch, getting to know each other. I have loved you through births and deaths, through prosperity and hardship, through youth and now old age, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Samuel replied, kissing the top of her head. My beautiful, fierce, determined Natalie. You were scrubbing steps for coins when I found you, and you became the foundation of my entire life. You are the best decision I ever made, the greatest gift I ever received. They sat together until the stars came out, the same stars they had watched on so many nights over so many years. Around them, the ranch was quiet, settling in for the night. In the bunkhouse, ranch hands slept, some of them the children and grandchildren of the original crew. In the main house, the rooms were filled with memories and love accumulated over 40 years of marriage and family. Samuel Quinn lived to be 84 years old, passing peacefully in his sleep in 1938 with Natalie beside him, as she had been for nearly 54 years of marriage. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched, whose families he had employed, whose respect he had earned through decades of fair dealing and honest work. Natalie lived another 5 years after Samuel's death, continuing to be the matriarch of the vast Quinn family that had grown from the two of them. She told stories to her great-grandchildren about the old days, about scrubbing steps in Seligman for 25 cents, about a rancher who had offered her not just a job but a whole new life, about falling in love on a porch under the Arizona stars. When Natalie died in 1943 at the age of 83, she was laid to rest beside Samuel on a hill overlooking the Triple Q Ranch. Their headstone reads simply, Samuel and Natalie Quinn, partners in life, partners in love, partners forever. The ranch continued under the stewardship of their children and grandchildren, growing and changing with the times, but never losing the heart and soul that Samuel and Natalie had built into its foundation. Every generation knew the story of how it all began, of the widow scrubbing steps and the rancher who hired her and gave her his surname. And every generation understood that what their ancestors had built was not just a ranch, but a legacy of love and partnership and possibility. In the end, it was a simple story. A woman in desperate circumstances, a man with the means to help, a chance encounter that became a courtship that became a marriage that became a lifetime of love and family and purpose. But simple stories can be the most powerful ones, and this story of Natalie and Samuel Quinn became the bedrock on which an entire family built their understanding of what love could be, what marriage should be, what partnership meant in its truest and deepest sense. The steps in Seligman that Natalie had scrubbed all those years ago eventually rotted away and were replaced with new ones, and then those too were replaced as the years marched on. The town changed, growing with the coming of the railroad, and then transforming again with the age of automobiles. But old-timers remembered the story of the widow and the rancher, and they passed it down to their children and grandchildren, until it became part of the town's folklore, a reminder that kindness and opportunity and love can transform lives in the most unexpected ways. And on the Triple Q Ranch, which still operated well into the 21st century under the management of Samuel and Natalie's many descendants, there hung a portrait in the main house. It showed a young couple standing together on a porch, the man tall and serious with whiskey-colored eyes, the woman smaller and dark-haired with eyes that held both strength and softness. Their hands were clasped together, and they were looking not at the camera but at each other, their love evident in every line of their faces. Beneath the portrait was a brass plaque that read, Samuel and Natalie Quinn, founders of the Triple Q Ranch. She scrubbed steps for coins. He hired her and gave her his surname. Together they built a legacy that endures. It was a testament to the truth that sometimes the greatest love stories begin in the most ordinary moments, and that a simple act of kindness and an offer of honest work can be the first step on a journey to forever. Samuel had seen Natalie's worth when she was at her lowest, and Natalie had seen Samuel's heart when she needed hope most. They had chosen each other not out of desperation or convenience, but out of genuine respect and growing love, and they had built a life together that stood as proof that true partnership, real love, and lasting commitment were not just possible, but were the foundation on which everything else worth having was built. Their story ended as all stories must, with death parting what life had joined together. But what they created together lived on in their descendants, in the land they had stewarded, in the values they had instilled, and in the love they had demonstrated through 54 years of marriage. It was a good ending, a full ending, a satisfying ending to a story that had begun with a widow's desperation and a rancher's kindness, and had bloomed into something beautiful and lasting and true. And if, on certain evenings when the sunset painted the Arizona sky in shades of orange and gold, ranch hands thought they caught glimpses of two figures sitting together on the porch of the old house, well, they were wise enough not to question it. Love like Samuel and Natalie's did not simply end when the people who embodied it passed on. It lingered in the land, in the stones, in the very air, a blessing and a promise to all who came after that love, real love, was worth every sacrifice, every risk, every leap of faith it required. The story of the widow and the rancher was complete, rounded, finished. From that August day in 1883, when Samuel first saw Natalie scrubbing steps, through their courtship and marriage, through the births of their children and the building of their ranch, through decades of partnership and love, all the way to their deaths and beyond, their story had unfolded with purpose and meaning and joy. It was exactly the life Natalie had dreamed of when she was at her lowest, and exactly the partnership Samuel had longed for when he was alone. They had found each other at the perfect moment, had chosen each other with clear eyes and full hearts, and had built something that transcended themselves and became a legacy for all who came after. In the end, that was what mattered. Not that they had started with so little, but that they had built so much. Not that circumstances had been against them, but that they had overcome. Not that love had seemed impossible, but that they had chosen it anyway and nurtured it into something strong enough to last lifetimes. Their story was finished, complete, whole, and it was perfect.